Audio on demand from Vision Christian Media.
Here's the way we can describe, and man, I wish I'd have known this when I was younger. Here's the way we can describe God's ironic way of choosing to work in history and in our lives. It can be called the Great Reversal. It is the Great Reversal. So that in our lives, when you think you're losing, you're actually winning. When it seems that God has abandoned you, He has never been more present. When you think it's the end, it's merely the beginning.
Today with Jeff Vines, pastor, apologist, and Bible teacher.
Hello and welcome to Today with Jeff Vines. In this episode, we have another message from Pastor Jeff. It's part of the series called Hope Beyond. If you've missed any, you can find all messages in this series wherever you listen to podcasts. Here's Pastor Jeff to begin today's message.
I'm in Philippians chapter 2, verse 5. Turn there. We'll get there in a moment. And as you kind of transition toward where I want to take you, I want to ask you a question that I've been asking in ministry for over 40 years. And that's when I meet somebody one-on-one and there's a counseling issue. Maybe it's fear, maybe it's anxiety, depression, whatever it is. Finally, we get to the point where I can ask them the question, okay, what is the thing that's missing in your life that you feel like if you had this thing, your life would be complete or it'd be better, or at least you'd have this sense of happiness going on in your life? What is it that's causing so much consternation that you don't have, that if you felt like if you did have, your life would be totally different? And it's interesting the different answers I've gotten to those questions over the years. And finally, also, when the person does finally get, if they finally get what it is they're looking for, there's always something else. They move on to the next thing. One of the things that happened to us when we were working in Zimbabwe, Africa, was that we would not come home as often, so we would miss out on cultural advances or digressions, depending on which way you look at it, over the course of a 5 or 10 year period. So sometimes we would come back home on furlough from Zimbabwe to places like Florida and Tennessee, and we would discover things that we didn't know were in existence. For instance, funny story, and I've used this oftentimes. There was this contraption that this guy came up with years and years ago. In the summer, we have both cicadas and June bugs, and they're just the nemesis. And so some guy, I guess, goes in a studio somewhere or a scientific laboratory somewhere and says, you know what, I've got to figure out a way to kill these things. And so he comes up with this beautiful blue light that is so attractive, I guess, to the June bug or to the cicada that they get too close to it. And if they get too close to it, they get electrocuted. So I'm sitting in this lawn chair in the backyard in the month of June, the hot summer, and I keep hearing this zapping noise, and it's just one bug after the next coming into this blue light because evidently it's so attractive. Get too close to it, electrocuted, and then the dead bodies gather in this tray below. And the question I've always asked, I was asking it then as well, is, I know bugs aren't that smart, but they surely do communicate. We know that's one thing about the animal world. They do communicate with each other. So where is the bug, that flies up to this blue light and looks down in the tray below of hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of June bugs and all the carnage, and stops? And then goes back and tells all the other June bugs, hey, don't fly into that blue light because if you get too close, it'll kill you. It's almost like, and I thought about this. You think, well, you have too much time on your hands. But if you think about this, I think the bug is a lot like we are. And that is, I think every bug that goes up to the blue light thinks they're the exception. All right, I know it got all of these people before me or bugs before me, but I'm the exception to the rule. It's not going to get me. And I think therein lies the problem with Christ followers who are trying to live with one foot in each kingdom, because the Bible is clear about this. And we've used this passage numerous times in 1 John 5:19, that we know we're children of God, but the whole world lies under the control of the evil one. So that tells us that the sway of the world is one big bug trap. That this whole world and everything that's lit up, everything that is illuminated, everything that is attractive, everything that is beautiful to the eyes is trying to entice us into a world order or system ultimately designed to destroy us. And you don't have to be that smart to see this. Look at our world right now. I look at the political situation. You got Trump and you got Biden. And even though I don't try to get involved that much in politics, I will tell you this. Is there anybody other than me that's looking at these two leaders and first of all saying, is this the best we have to offer out of all the people, millions and millions of people? And then there's another part of me that says, man, how I long for a leader that would just step up and be transparent and humble and say, you know what? What our country needs more than anything else is for all of us to come together and work these things out. Wouldn't that be awesome if someone quiet, that wasn't filled with hatred and rhetoric, just quiet, humble, and somewhat reserved, peaceful, that would come together and say, okay, everybody calm down, stop shouting at each other, stop calling each other names, stop powering up, but let's power down and let's work this thing out. But the problem is, this is the way of the world. Power up, demand your rights, talk about what you're entitled to. It's not that difficult to see that entitlement breeds hostility where humility breeds servanthood. Now keep going just for a moment, and I'll show you where we're going here. Look at the conflict right now in the Middle East. What's it all about? Well, it's about the same thing every conflict in the world has ever been about: land and power. Land and power. Remember a few years ago, I told you a story where my mentor was invited to sit down with 18 leaders of Hamas. And the leader of Hamas was Sheikh Dalal. And so 18 leaders around this table are getting to meet with the founder of Hamas. And they each got one question. There was no rebuttal. Everybody got one question. They're attempting to bring everybody together in Jerusalem. And at this point, they were trying to do something that would propagate or produce peace. And so when it came time for my mentor to ask his question was about suicide bombing. He said, what do you think about suicide bombers? And although my mentor never told me the answer, he said I didn't like the answer. And I prayed that God would give me a word in that moment of encouragement or some way to cause peace in the midst of all this conflict. So as they were walking out to the car, ending the meeting, remember every person got one question, that was it. But as they were walking out, he found himself in close proximity to Sheikh Dalal. And he felt overwhelmed by the Spirit of God to say to him something very simple. He said, you know, I pray for peace in this world. He says, but you know as well as I do, Sheikh Dalal, that just over there, not too far from where we've met, is a mountain where God asked Abraham to take his son Isaac and sacrifice him. And just before Abraham was about to bring the knife of sacrifice down, an angel of the Lord, or God himself, stopped the knife, and there was a ram caught in the thicket. And out of that story, we learn something beautiful, that God will provide the lamb of sacrifice needed to forgive and take away the sins of the world in order that we can forgive each other at the same magnitude we ourselves have been forgiven. And then my mentor looked at Sheikh Dalal and said these words. He says, listen, until you and I receive the son that God has provided, the lamb that God has provided, we will continue to sacrifice our sons and daughters on the battlefields of this world for land and for power. It's true. I've used that illustration 1,000 times, but I've never gone to this next part. What exactly did he mean by that? It sounds good, but what is he saying? We look around at what is happening all around the world right now, the oppression of the poor, injustice perpetrated by the powerful, people who think that happiness is based on powering up, or causing all kinds of carnage around the world, but they're addicted to it. And here's the problem. You and I, we walk out, we look over the world, and we see all the devastation. And there's a temptation of us to begin to pray for all the evil out there in the world. And as I've mentioned before, usually when you do that, the first thing the Spirit of God does in your life is say, hey, before you worry about all the evil out there in the world, how about dealing with the evil that's in your own heart? Start with yourself. And that's supposed to lead you to believe that we're on to something here. And are our lives not microcosms of the bigger problem in humanity? Are we not pursuing the same thing the world pursues? Only on a smaller scale, so the damage is not intense. But do we not power up? Do we not follow the way of the world? Do we not want notoriety? Do we not want our name to be known? Do we not want to accomplish something that sets us apart from the herd? Do we not want to find a romantic solution that meets all our needs and satisfies all our desires? Do we not want power and position and romance? Do we not pursue those things to the point that we make them gods? And as a result of our pursuit, often we have to step over or above or on others to get there. Our decisions don't make as much damage, don't cause as much conflict or damage as some of those decisions on a larger scale. But we are like the rest of the world. We think we can fly close to the blue light, but we're the exception to the rule. We can live like everybody else, but we're the exception. We're not going to get zapped, electrocuted, and end up as carnage in the bottom of the tray. Once you understand that we are living in a time where it is so difficult to swim against the stream or to go against the grain, then your eyes can be open to the fact that we not only have a hope in the future, but we have a hope from the future. And that's what we've been trying to say. That the Christ follower is supposed to die to all these things. Is supposed to look at the blue light and know it's not about what you're entitled to or how many freedoms you have or what your rights are. It's we live a life that produces life, not death. And that once we go against the grain and opposite to the world system, that's when we have the best chance of living. So the question then becomes, and by the way, let me just say from the get-go, this sermon, you've heard me complain a little bit from time to time about pep rallies. Well, this sermon is a pep rally. I make no apology for that. Because I think we have to stop in the middle of this before we go on verse by verse in 1 Corinthians 15 and finish this series. I think we have to pause for a moment and really lean into what we're trying to accomplish here. We're trying to say that because Jesus rose from the dead, that we too have died to ourselves and we're supposed to be raised to a new way of living. And in that new way of living is nothing like where the world is trying to take us. So if we keep going the direction of the world, we're going to get zapped eventually. And then it's hard and difficult for God to use someone who is dead physically and spiritually. So then, what is our model? Who is our model? And the answer is Jesus. Now let me take you back to a passage you've read numerous times in the light of where we're going here. It's in Philippians 2 verse 5, and we're told that in our relationships with one another, and I'm assuming one another as individuals, but also as our relationship with the world, we're supposed to have the same mindset as Jesus Christ, who being in the very nature God did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant, by being made in human likeness, and being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on the cross. And the rest of that passage talks about because he did that, God exalted him to the highest places so that his name is above every name. And at one point in the future, in history, every knee will bow. Every tongue confess that Jesus Christ is Lord to the glory of God the Father. Now, this is exactly what my mentor meant when he spoke to Sheikh the Law. He's trying to say to the Sheikh, the answer to peace, the answer to love, joy, the answer to a fulfilling life is not to power up, but to power down. Jesus did not claim his rights, he gave them up. Jesus did not come to be served, but to give his life a ransom for many. And strangely enough, what the Middle East needs today more than anything else is the very thing they've totally rejected, Jesus Christ. And what you and I need more than anything else to calm the storms, to end depression and anxiety, to discover peace and an overarching joy, and to experience that life that comes from the future, the power that comes from the future, is to follow, not just say that we believe in, but to actually follow Jesus Christ, to stop going the same direction as the world system, as it will ultimately destroy you. And let me tell you something, in our church right now, I'm seeing the deposit, the early seedlings of a revival among our young adults. So just last night, or this past Tuesday night, they gathered together again. There's preaching, there's teaching, there's prayer, but you can tell by the atmosphere that God is moving, and the reason God is moving, because you have, maybe not all of them, but you have a lot of young people who have come to the end of themselves. They no longer believe the lie like many of you and I do who should know better because we're older. They no longer believe the lie of the world, that the world has anything of substance to offer them, and they're going to find their peace and their joy and everything they're looking for in the flow of the world. So here's what I want to do. That's a long introduction. But I want to show you something so clear that it's the big picture now. It's not getting into the weeds. It's the big picture. But the big picture of the Bible should allow us to get down into the weeds of our lives and come up with the remedy of what's ailing so many of us. Now remember, please follow me now. The Bible is a story. It's His story. What is the purpose of His story? To reveal salvation and to reveal the nature, workings, and doings of God Himself. So in the gospel story, in His story, we're told the manner in which God is going to work in history, in Christ, in our lives, and in the world. We're given a foreshadowing. Hey, here's the way God's going to work. You don't have to guess. Here's the way He's going to work in our lives. And that should comfort us, because when things happen that confuse us, we should be able to stand back and say, wait a minute, based on the gospel that is fully encapsulated in the cross and the resurrection, this doesn't surprise me. So even though the story of the gospel is told in full in the death, burial, and resurrection, the story of the gospel is told again and again all the way from Genesis to Revelation. I don't have time to give you example after example, so I'm going to give you one. If you go to the Gospel of Mark, the gospel opens up with a famous quote from Isaiah 40, that the Lord Himself will one day come to His people. And then Mark makes the astonishing claim that happened in Jesus. Jesus is the fulfillment of that prophecy, that the all-powerful Lord of the universe has come to earth in the form of Jesus Christ. Now, in the early sections of Mark, we're led to believe that Jesus will soon display His power and destroy all opposition. So again and again, we see His supernatural power as He heals the sick, He calms the storm, He feeds the multitudes. Even the demons cry out and are helpless before Him. Evil, pain, suffering is about to receive the knockout blow we've all been waiting for. But then comes the second half of Mark's gospel, and everything reverses. Jesus is persecuted by His enemies. His friends forsake Him. His Father abandons Him. And if you're a reader or if you're a participant in the ministry of Jesus, you're thinking, wow, didn't see that coming. And I promise you, neither did the people of Jesus' day. In fact, scholars have recorded for us at least 3 ways Jesus' ministry would have been strange and startling to the people of His day. And I got to tell you, it's strange and startling to the people of our day. In fact, it's the reason so many people struggle with Jesus today. Far too many people love the way Jesus works until He starts working that way in your life. So first, here's what Jesus does. He reverses the positions of insiders and outsiders. In Mark chapter 3, the leaders and the people in high position reject Jesus, while the common people in huge crowds are pursuing Jesus and receiving Him. So the people who should have been leading are behind, and the people who are behind are now leading. Richard B. Hayes, New Testament scholar at Duke University, writes this: those who are in positions of authority and privilege reject Jesus and the message. Even Jesus' own disciples are continually shown to be slow to understand His teachings. Other, however, people of low or despised position in the social world of the first century Jewish culture receive the gospel gladly, for their need is great. The lepers, the demon-possessed, the woman with a hemorrhage, the Syrophoenician woman, the little children, blind Bartimaeus, and the nameless woman who anoints Jesus at Bethany for burial. The Gentile centurion at the cross. These are the examples put forth by Mark of faithful response to Jesus. Many who are the first will be last, and the last will be first. Those of us who are familiar with the story should not underestimate the shock of this inversion. Now stay with me. Right now you're wondering, how are we going to fit all this together? This is a cerebral activity just for a few minutes here, but stay with me. So Jesus, first of all, reverses the position of insiders and outsiders. That shouldn't surprise us, but it does, because all through life, what we've learned so far, if you want to go the way of Jesus, usually you just do the opposite of what the world's doing, and you'll have a different result. Second, Jesus redefines the nature of power and the value of suffering. Think about it, the value of suffering. Jesus chooses the powerless over the powerful. But He does not, as revolutionaries do, merely get them to exchange places. The gospel redefines what power is and who is powerful and who is not. So Jesus gives up His power, did not consider equality with God a thing to be held on to, becomes a vulnerable mortal, falls victim to a violent miscarriage of justice. So the most powerful entity in the universe sets aside his power to accomplish a greater good. That goes back to the passage with which most of us are familiar, who being in the very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing. That Greek word right there is what we base theology on as the kenosis theory. It's the idea that the all-powerful being in the universe willingly, it was not removed from him, but willingly set aside the privileges associated with being God that he might achieve a greater good. So he's not losing his power, he's powering down. And in great irony, if you know the gospel story, Jesus' apparent powerlessness became the most powerful thing in accomplishing what it is he set out to accomplish. Third, so not only does Jesus reverse the positions of insiders and outsiders, not only does he redefine the nature of power and the value of suffering, third, he presents a vision of life that is ironic and counterintuitive, profoundly ironic. And you know what irony means? Irony, these are statements or events that are eventually turned into the opposite way that they originally appeared to be going. So irony is always surprising because it shatters expectation. Now here's the question. What is so ironic about the way God has chosen to operate in our lives? Now, we've spent 20 minutes just now talking about the irony of how God does things the opposite way that most of us would do things. His way leads to life, our way leads to death and destruction. The current of the world takes you to death and destruction. God's current, God's way of living takes you to life and abundant life. It is the power of the resurrection into your life for the here and now. Now, here's the way we could describe, and man, I wish I'd have known this when I was younger. Here's the way we can describe God's ironic way of choosing to work in history and in our lives. It can be called the great reversal. It is the great reversal. So that in our lives, when you think you're losing, you're actually winning. When it seems that God has abandoned you, He has never been more present. When you think it's the end, it's merely the beginning. When you take a closer look at even Luke's gospel, you see the great reversal everywhere. Samaritans were seen by Jews as racial inferiors and enemies. And yet Jesus comes along and places Samaritans on the same spiritual level as the Jews. Today, that would be like saying that prostitutes and preachers are on the same spiritual level. Imagine that. Jesus' freedom from racist tribalism that was so common in his day, his words became explosive. I mean, you were nothing if you were not spiritually superior to somebody. So a riot is launched when Jesus declares that God loves the Gentiles as much as He does the Jews. But it gets worse, or better, depending on your perspective. Jesus mentions tax collectors, who were sort of like those people in France who betrayed their own people, took positions of authority, and profited under Nazi occupation. But Jesus spoke of tax collectors in a positive way. In fact, Luke tells us that tax collectors eagerly sought, it wasn't just Zacchaeus and Matthew. Luke tells us that the tax collectors eagerly sought out the teaching and preaching of both John the Baptist and Jesus. And then we all know the story of Zacchaeus, a very famous tax collector, went home justified. Talk about the great reversal in the minds of the Jews. Now, why does God repeatedly choose the less powerful people and then work His deliverance through the powerlessness and suffering?
You've been listening to Today with Jeff Vines. Thanks for joining us. Next time, we'll bring you the rest of this message from Pastor Jeff.
Jesus did not come and say, I am strong and brilliant, now pull yourself together and you can be like me. Jesus Christ exchanged places with you. He came to live the life you should have lived, to die the death you should have died, so that you could be reconciled to God, so the power of God could come into you and you could live out the great reversal. Do you see this?
You can listen to more messages like this. Just search for Today with Jeff Vines wherever you get your podcasts.
You make me wanna dance and sing with every single breath I breathe. I will bring this offering. You are my wonder. You bring the wonder.
Today. Today with Jeff Vines.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.